Wonderful. Okay. So for all of our viewers online, perhaps on YouTube for perpetuity, we want to welcome you to this morning's Shabbat service. We are going to be having a bit of an abbreviated service here today, beginning on page 107. Page 107 with the Sidur Sim Shalom. And for those perhaps tuning in for the first time, my name is Rabbi David Barnett. I'm honored to be the rabbi here of Congregation Beth Am of Longwood, Florida. We are the Beth Am of Longwood, Florida, not the Beth Am of Los Angeles, California. So we won't get those two confused. And we want to thank Jason, who came in first to set this microphone up for us, and for me in particular. We thank you so much. And then Tamara for coming in and actually getting us going with our YouTube recording, and maybe some of it will be live streaming as well. That having been said, page 107 will continue with the Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMvorach, Baruch Adonai Borach Leolam Vaed, Baruch Adonai Borach Leolam Vaed, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam, Yotzer Or Uvrei Choshech, Osei Shalom, Uvrei Et HaKol, HaKol Yedocha VaKol Yeshabechucha. At the bottom of 107, Ein Ke'arkecha Adonai Eloheinu Be'olam Hazeh, Ve'en Tzunatcha Malkeinu L'chayei HaOlam Haba, Efes Biltecha Go'eleinu Limot Mashiach, Ve'en Domei Lecha Moshienu L'tchiyat HaMetim. On page 108, we're going to do the first stanza and the last stanza of El Adon. El Adon al kol ha'masim, Baruch u'mvorach lefi kol neshama, God lo v'tuvo malei olam, da'at u'tvuna sovavim oto, shevach notnim lo, kol tzva marom, tiferet u'gedola, Serafim Ofanim, Bechayot HaKodesh. Page 109. Le'el asher Shabbat mikol ha'masim, Bayom ha'shvi'it vayashav al kisei kvodo. Mizmor shir le'yom ha'Shabbat. תתברך משה על שבח מעשה ידיך ועל מורה אור שעשית יברכוך סלם. We continue page 110. תתברך צורנו מלכנו וגואלנו בורא קדושים נשתבח. Four lines down, page 110. כולם אהובים, כולם ברורים, כולם גיבורים וכולם עושים באימה ורע רצון כולם, וכולם פותחים מפיהם בקדושה בתורה, בשירה ובזמרה, מברכים ושבחים, מפארים ומעריצים ומקישים וממליכים, את שם האל המלך הגדול, הגיבור והנורא קדוש הוא. וכולם מקבלים עליהם עול מלכות שמיים זה מזה, ונותנים רשות זה לזה להקיש אותם, בנחת רוח בסופה ורוע ונימה קדושה, כולם כאחד עונים ואומרים ביראה, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות מלוך על הארץ כבודו. והאבנים וחייל הקודש ברעש גדול מתנסים לעומת שרפים, לעומתם משבחים ואומרים, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. לאל ברוך נמות ניתנו מלך לחי וקיים. המחדש בטובו בכל יום תמיד מעשה בראשית כאמור, לעושי הורים גדולים כלי עולם חסדו, אור חדש על ציון תאיר ונזכה כולנו מאורה לאורו. ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות. Page 111. And as we gather the four corners of the tzitzit, we continue with V'havi'enu l'shalom. V'havi'enu l'shalom me'arba kanfot ha'aretz v'tolichenu komimi l'ratzenu ki al bo'el yeshot ata uvanu v'charta mikol am v'lashon v'keravtanu Adonai Eloheinu v'keravtanu l'shimcha ha'gadol tzela b'emet להודות לך ולייחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. Amen. Page 112 with the Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לו תותפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. We continue with the intermediate paragraphs of the Shema through page 113. למען תזכרו עשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. In the middle of page 113, L'dor vador. L'dor vador kayam u'shemo kayam v'chiso nachon u'malchuto v'hemrat olad kayamet. At the bottom of 113, Emet Chata. Emet Chata hu Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu Malkeinu melech Avotenu Go'elenu Go'el Avotenu Yotzreinu Tzuri Shotenu Kodenu matzilenu me'olam shemecha Ein Elohim zulatecha Ezrat avotenu ata me'ad olam Ata me'olam. Page 114. Tilolel elyon baruch u'mvorach Moshe b'nei Israel lechanu shira v'simcha rabba v'yamru chulam mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh norat yilot hosefel שירה חדשה שיבחו גאולים לשמך על שפת הים יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל ובטחנו ממך יהודה וישראל גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל ברוך אתה אדוני God Israel. At this point, since it was not announced that we are having live streaming or YouTube today, Given the circumstances, we're going to continue silently and individually for the Amidah, the Shabbat Amidah, and that is found between pages 115b through 120. If you are continuing with the Amidah, the silent Amidah, pages 115b through 120, please continue individually. I'm going to invite Greg Allman to conclude the Amidah here with the chanting of Oseh Shalom. Greg has been in my Hebrew class and knows this, I'm sure, from before anyway. The text is found at the bottom of page 120 right here. Oseh Shalom bim romav. Say shalom aleinu. And so I'm going to invite Greg to lead us in that. We want to welcome everyone who's just come in, and I will be back also momentarily to the Bima following the chanting of this.
On the bottom of page 120, Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'imru, Amen. Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. V'maru, Amen. Let's repeat that while we wait for the rabbi, following his instructions. Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, amen. Ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, Ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, amen.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, great. I want to thank Greg for leading the Oseh Shalom, concluding our Amidah with that. And at this point, I think what we're going to do is go directly into a little small discussion of the Torah reading. And then I have a special teaching for us for the Haftorah that is associated with today. And so this week we begin the new parasha of Bamidbar. And literally that means in the desert. And the English name for this book is the Book of Numbers. Of course, because you really have the taking of a census here. The taking of the number of Israelites. In this case, they're counting the males of military age and fighting capability. And they're separated by different tribes. And each tribe has its own encampment. And they make a census, in essence. And that is really the essence of the first several chapters here, beginning with chapter 1 of the book of Bamidbar. By the way, how are these, for those who may be watching on YouTube who don't maybe have a full understanding of how the Torah portions are named? They are named because of the first word, sometimes the first word, or certainly the first significant word or a new or unusual word in the first sentence of each parasha, of each portion. So for example, in this case, we have in the book of Numbers, we have the beginning phrase, V'yedaber Adonai el Moshe. Now that appears hundreds of times in the Torah. So there's nothing, although it's nice, the Lord spoke to Moses, but the point is that it repeats so many times that it's not singular in its mention. And so then what is the next word? Well, the Lord spoke to Moses where? B'midbar Sinai, in the desert, in the wilderness. So that's why the portion is named B'midbar. And of course, like I said, it involves the census of the taking of a census of the Israelite community according to its clans and the ancestral houses. And they do specify that this is from this census is going to be taken of those of military age, men from the age of 20 years and up, all those who are able to bear arms. Okay, and then it lists the various tribes, and then it lists their numbers, and that is continued. For example, if you turn to page, if you have your Chumashim there, page 772. You have the listing of the various tribes with their numbers. But then also in chapter 2, going on to page 775, you also have the repetition of these numbers. So that is pretty much straightforward. And then in chapter 3, you have the listing of the names of Aaron's sons. And of course his eldest, his firstborn, and Nadav, and then Avihu, his firstborn and second born son, were involved in some type of idolatrous act and offering, it says, the text here is alien fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai. So it was involved. They really don't know what was the cause of why they were basically zapped, but it was very sudden. And you recall Aaron's reaction he was taken in shock, and he didn't complain to God, but what did he do? Vayidom Aharon, he was silent. And, but he had two other sons, Elazar and Itamar, and they would then continue in the line to be able to be of direct assistance to him. And the Levites were also appointed here to be direct assistants to the Kohanim. And the Levites were also in charge of you could say the construction or the setting up, really, of the tabernacle whenever they would be moving. So when they would be traveling, they would dismantle it. That's the word I was looking for. And then when they were about to encamp, they would set up this tabernacle. And the Levites themselves had sole responsibility for doing this. If anyone else came close during that time or around that tabernacle, the text says they're going to get zapped. They're going to be put to death immediately. Although, I guess some of it says, I'm looking for specifically on page 778 of verse 10. You shall make Aaron and his sons responsible for observing their priestly duties, and any outsider who encroaches shall be put to death. So pretty serious. They have their sacred space, and it's supposed to be inviolate. And then it also says that the Levites themselves will be consecrated to God as an entire group, as reminiscent of the firstborn, the dedication of the firstborn of the land of Egypt. So that really takes you through the essence of most of chapter 3. And basically, chapter 4 continues with some of the priestly delineations. That having been said, any questions or discussions on that we might entertain before I go to the Haftorah, which is really what I want to focus on a little bit more here for us this morning? I'm going to go to the Haftorah then. The Haftorah, most of you have the Homashim. So if you'll turn to page 786, page 786. And I'd just like to do a little bit of a teaching from the Haftorah here today. This is a beautiful, beautiful Haftorah, speaking in so many ways of the love of the prophet Hosea for not only his wife Gomer, but really analogizing his relationship in his own life to the love of God for the people Israel. And let me just sort of recap. We're beginning really in chapter 2 here of the book of Hosea. But if you think of Hosea, really, what is his legacy? What is his essence? His main message? And it's a message, as I shared last night, many of you who were able to be at the Chavarah, it's a theme of love. Tremendous outpouring of love that will conquer everything, that will be greater than any disappointment or tragedy, that will overlook shortcomings, that will embrace the true spirit of the unity in either of a couple or the unity of the relationship between God and the Jewish people. So that's very, very beautiful. And if you think of nothing else with Hosea, think of that love. So he had a wife, Gomer, and she strayed. She was involved with other men. She was unfaithful to him and engaged in various kinds of, let's just call it, for the sake, since we're on YouTube here, we'll say disreputable behavior. She wasn't a good girl. She didn't really get brownie points for her loyalty in this marital relationship. But Hosea had a real problem. He really, really loved her. He loved her so much that he couldn't stop loving her. That was the nature of his love. Now, of course, he was very pained by that. He was pained by the hurt and the devastation that he felt, the betrayal. After all, you know, if in today's society it's disgraceful for one partner to be disloyal, how much the more so in ancient Middle Eastern society like that? It was a total loss of faith. Total. It's two words there: a loss of faith and a loss of faith. He could no longer count on her to be completely loyal to him. This was devastating to him. But he still loved her so much. And the main theme to remember, and then we'll look at some particulars here, Hosea felt like this. He figured, he knew how much he loved his wife Gomer, in spite of what she had done, and he still wanted her back, and he did take her back. But he felt that if he, as a human being, could still love his wife Gomer so much that after what he did, he'd still want to take her back, how much the more so would God, with the capacity of infinite love, want to continue loving the Jewish people, even if the Jewish people had strayed. And as you recall, many of the messages of so many of the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, they're always criticizing, they're critical. They're talking about how the Jewish nation, the Israelites, strayed from God's path, from the commandments, from the word. But nonetheless, despite those fractures in the relationship, Hosea felt that, of course, if he could love his wife Gomer and still want her back, how much the more so would God want to continue to love the Jewish people and to continue, in particular, the covenantal relationship between God and the Jewish people. We are approaching the holiday of Shavuot. It begins this evening. Tomorrow we will have services on Zoom. And the holiday of Shavuot basically commemorates and acknowledges the idea of the relationship between God and the Jewish people, akin to a matrimonial relationship, where God is seen as the groom, the nation Israel is seen as the bride, the kala, and as I pointed out last evening with our chavurah, for a kosher wedding in the Jewish tradition, according to the rabbis, you need a document. It's not just from the rabbis, it's really from the Tanakh, from the Bible itself. You need a wedding document. You need a ketubah. And the ketubah is a tremendous document that gives security to the bride. Unlike so many other ancient Middle Eastern societies where women were just looked at, and not just Middle Eastern, in Asia and India, you know, women were just looked at basically as chattel. You know, you have cows, you have goats, you have camels, and a woman might be purchased for a cow, or maybe 5, 6 goats. And that happens all over the world, places in Africa still. And in India they did it. Well, the Jewish tradition over 4,000 years ago was very different. Certainly 3,000, a solid 3,000 years ago, was very, very different. Saying that in the concept of the relationship of a marriage, the man took upon himself certain responsibilities to feed, to clothe, to shelter, to provide satisfaction to his wife. And she would be guaranteed those things. And in the event of a disruption there, and if the man decided to divorce the woman, which was allowed in Jewish tradition, which is allowed in Jewish tradition, then the woman would have, in essence, a financial security stated in the original ketubah. It was a financial instrument of security, and for a virgin, they did value virginity more there. So, in the original then concept of the monetary, you could say, security, it was 200 zuzim of gold. Now, what is a zuz? What's the value of a zuz? Well, we don't know for sure. I don't know if we can really figure out exactly. But just take a guess. Pretend that a zuz would maybe be about the size of an ounce. Just maybe it was more, maybe it was less. I don't know. I don't know if we can know. I don't even know if the archaeologists could know, because they didn't have our present system of pounds and grams and weights and measures, right? That having said, just imagine it's probably like, you know, maybe, do you remember the old silver dollars, right? That size, or a 50-cent piece. We don't know. But, you know, maybe a piece like this big, you know, so the camera can see. Maybe like a piece this big for a zuz. So 200 of them now, by comparison, notwithstanding the fact that in our modern situation, many of the markets, I have to say, sadly, are manipulated, and we won't go into details on that here. But nonetheless, still at today's current prices, 1 ounce of gold is roughly, you know, a little under $2,000. So figure 200 of that, that's $400,000. Well, that's still enough to buy a house, even with inflation going on. So in some cases, in some places, in some cases and in some places, certainly still enough for a solid down payment, right? It's financial security for the woman, right? Think still with our inflated prices, still 400,000 could buy food for quite a while and other expenses and take care of that. So the woman had a degree of financial security. So in the analogy here between God being the groom and Israel being the bride, what is the ketubah? Well, as I pointed out last night, the Torah itself, the written scroll of the Torah, serves as the written document, as the ketubah. And that's very, very special. And as I shared last night, we'll now put this on the YouTube. I was once part of a wonderful celebration at the Skirball Museum, which was across from the new Jewish University. It used to be the University of Judaism. Now it's called the Jewish University on Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles. And I was there for a celebration of Shavuot, and they made these giant figurines, basically, out of paper mache and other things. And I seem to remember, actually, there were people on stilts inside of them, and so it was quite a presentation. They were like 15, 20 feet high, and a bride and then a groom. And of course, the groom representing God and the bride representing the people of Israel. And we were all dancing, and there was a klezmer. It was a tremendous celebration. I even played violin on the occasion. Joining in with the klezmer band, but it wasn't heard because I wasn't mic'd. But that's okay, I had fun. But we're really talking here then about Shavuot being this celebration of the unity of Israel and God, as it were, in a matrimonial context. So here on page, let me, mention 3 key points here, and then we'll look at them a little bit in more detail. The first that Hosea teaches is that we can be, and in fact are loved, both by people and particularly by God, while we are imperfect. We don't have to be perfect in order to be loved. Secondly, Hosea demonstrates that renewed hope and faith can be regenerated, indeed, from loss and destruction. And in the context of that, he will give her words of new hope and new courtship and renewed love. And the third point that we'll want to discuss is that this new and renewed love can, in fact, be deeper and stronger than existed before, and how special that is. So, his wife was not perfect and strayed off with other men, and yet he has hope that things will be better, and he still loves her. And so he says in the future that instead of illegitimate children from other relationships that he had being called, "You are not my people," that descendants in the future shall be called the children of the living God. And that's on page 787, the beginning of chapter 2. But he recalls he has to deal and acknowledge the hurt that he felt. So he says, rebuke your mother, who in this case refers to the Jewish people. Rebuke her. She is not my wife, and I am not her husband. And there's going to be a period of unpleasantness and punishment. But she's going to realize, his wife is going to realize that indeed the other loves that she had are ephemeral, they're transitory. They're not solid like the relationship that Hosea has for her. Similarly with the strayings of Israel. Israel will eventually realize that the true God is the God to come back to. So by this analogy, she says that is the returning wife, or the people Israel, will say, I will go, this is in verse 8, I will go and return to my first husband, for then I fared better than now. And then Hosea recalls, just as happened to the Jewish people, right? He recalls the blessings that he gave her before. It was I who bestowed on her the new grain and wine and oil, and who lavished silver on her and gold, which they used for Baal, again, the foreign worshipers. And so there will be a period of punishment and shame. He will uncover her shame in verse 12, in the sight of her lovers, and none shall save her. The vines and the fig trees will be laid waste. And he's saying that the mentality of this straying was that this was like payment that she received from her lovers. But then, not only can he love her again, even while she is imperfect, but going to the second point, there can be renewed hope and faith that can be regenerated from this loss. And that is exemplified in verse 16. It's very, very beautiful. We're on page 789, very beautiful. He says, assuredly, I will speak coaxingly to her and lead her through the wilderness and speak to her tenderly. I will give her vineyards from there and the valley of Achor as a plowland of hope. And then, very, very significant and beautiful lines. There she shall respond as in the days of her youth when she came up from the land of Egypt. So, you remember the verse on High Holiday, right? On High Holidays? It's talking about Lechtech Acharai Bemidbar, you know, the bride of Israel who will come back to me like the days of her youth. So that's reminiscent here of that feeling. There shall she respond as in the days of her youth, when she came out of Egypt. So we have this notion of renewed hope and new courtship. But then it gets even better. That this renewed love can even be stronger than before. And what is called for here is, in fact, a new covenant, making a new covenant. V'charati lahem brit bayom hahu. And the witnesses will be the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the creeping things of the ground. And not only that, but within the framework of this new covenant, as expressed in verse 20, even the nature of human life as we know it will be transformed. Namely, there will be an absence of war. Now, many rabbis have said that the times of the Messiah could be characterized simply by an absence of war, messianic times. And they will be allowed to lie down in safety. So, for those of you who were at the Chavarah yesterday, we had something that was very reminiscent of this. Greg, would you like to share what it was? Okay. We saw a double rainbow. A double rainbow in the backyard of the Rashi's home. And it was a humongous, near perfect large double rainbow. The primary rainbow under it was very vibrant in its colors, extremely vibrant, with all of the bright colors. And then there was a second rainbow going all across, almost all across the sky above it, parallel to it. Now, what does the rainbow symbolize? Well, go back to the book of, basically, of Bereshit, of Genesis with Noah. After the flood, what was the sign that God made with the Jewish people as a covenant, as a renewed covenant? It was the rainbow. The rainbow was to symbolize that God would never destroy the earth again. So it is not coincidental by any means that on page 790 we have this phrase, V'charati lahem brit bayom hahu. And he also mentions then, of course, the animals of the field, the animals, the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, just like happened in the book of Genesis with the story of Noah. This is no coincidence. This is by deliberate design and conception by Hosea, that he envisions this new love to be stronger and deeper and better than before. And how does he culminate this? He culminates it with verse 21 in Myrtle language. And by the way, this verse has been incorporated into the daily liturgy when we symbolically bind ourselves to God through the wrapping of tefillin. And what are the verses that are said prior to that? It's these verses. Ve'arastich li le'olam. Now, by the way, this word ve'arastich, that's from the marital language. I will espouse you forever. Ve'arastich li b'tzedek u'v'mishpat, in justice and righteousness, and uvechesed and grace, uverachamim, and in compassion, in mercy. And then we have the final one, ve'arastich li v'emunah, in faith, in belief, in faith, with faithfulness, with loyalty, with steadfastness. And what becomes the culminating idea after that is all set and in place? These last three words are not without tremendous significance. V'yadat et Adonai. That you shall be, is the translation here in the Chumash is, you shall be devoted to the Lord, but really that it's knowledge. De'ah involves and presupposes a deep knowledge here. And earlier in the book of Genesis, when a couple had a sexual relationship and encounter, or basically a unity of that, they would, and the language of the book of Genesis, it uses the word yada, and he knew her, right? So they knew each other. So this involves then and implies a very deep connected intimacy. And it is on that spiritual level of intimacy. Obviously, this is by analogy, just as when people are close through this close, intimate knowledge of each other, how much the more so could it be on the spiritual level with God, right? To have this relationship, this devoted relationship, which involves this deep partnership and this deep knowing between ourselves and God, to dare to approach, to get a feeling of that divine essence. We are limited as humans, and so it would be presumptuous to say that we would ever know God completely like we can know another person. That having been said, it has many mystical implications, as well as many real ones, for trying to approach that level of intimacy and knowledge and understanding. Certainly God has it of us. We may not have it of God in the same way, But God knows our thoughts and our hopes and our fears and our limitations. And still, going back to the primary theme of the whole Haftarah, embraces us in love with our faults. So, again, reviewing these 3 points, we can be and are loved even though we are imperfect. There can be renewed hope and faith that can be regenerated from loss and destruction, as Hosea himself felt in his life, and as he exhibited and felt the relationship between his wife and him, he then analogized to God, feeling that indeed there could be a renewed and a new and renewed love that would have deeper and stronger bonds than any that were experienced before. And so if we can experience a sense of that renewal and love in our daily lives, how much the more better, how much better would that be? Amen. As a postscript to that thought, of course, that's one of my favorite phrases, Hareza Mishubach. It comes from somewhere special. Does anybody know? Where does that phrase come from? Hareza Mishubach. It is accounted praiseworthy. It's just always been in my mind. Even before I understood all of the Hebrew. But if you would have asked me as a boy of 13, 14, the more, I'll give a little bit more of a translation. The more that one explains of it, it is accounted praiseworthy. What would we be referring to? What famous document that we celebrate every year around a table for one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals? That's right, Tom. Tom got the answer, the Haggadah. When you tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt, you're supposed to elaborate on it. And the rabbis tell us, and they tell the story of how rabbis were gathered in Bnei Brak, which is it was a Talmudic center of learning. And they were up till how late? Did you remember from the Haggadah? How late were they up telling this story? That's right. Yes, that's exactly correct. Till right before the sun was coming up. Exactly. They were talking about it all night. It's a very long Seder. Very long Seder. But they were really into it. But in that section of the Haggadah, which means the telling, the word Haggadah means the retelling. So it says the more you can dwell upon the story of the Exodus, the more it is considered praiseworthy. So, any thoughts, any questions, any comments on that? So let's move ahead now to the blessing for those who are ill in our congregation. And if you'll turn to your back covers. We'll do the Misha Berach, and I know some of you here have special people that you want to mention, and I have the list here, and it is even dated for today. That's great. And we also have the Yeast Core list that we'll be mentioning later on. So, the back section of your prayer books here. Misheberach avoteinu mekor habracha limoteinu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. So we'd like to mention for blessing here the following names: Barbara Allman, Steve Ashheim, Mona Bachov, Sawyer Bartel, Teresa Kalla, Emilia Cooley, Audrey Dash, Gordon Feinberg, Pearl Friedman, Bob Gamson, Carla Gonzalez, although she's feeling better now, no? Or should we keep her on? Oh, okay. Jeffrey Greenwald, Eve Homburger, Alan Jacobs, Rita Kindle, Keith I think it's Keith or Keoth Langston, Steve Lifshin, Robert Maya, Sandy Minkin, Morris Rashi, Ron Rosenberg, Dom Salfi, Rob Seltzer, Harleen Schreck, Leslie Schulchinger, Daniel Siegel, Izzy Sigmund, Saul Stein, Andrea Diane Sylvester, Bill Thompson, Peter Teitelbaum, Nancy Town, Albert Warman, Herb Weissman, Suzette Weissman, Katerina Williams, Leibel ben Margolit, Liebe Shlomit Rachel bat Margolit, Weibel Shlomo ben Dvorah, Yishchal ben Etel, and Avraham ben Binyamin. So, let's start from the back here with Tom. If you have any other, okay, no names to add. Yes, Toby? Thank you. Osvaldo? Thank you. Mark, any to add? Okay. We'll start from the back on this side. Let's go ahead there. Okay, thank you, Jeff. Any others? Okay, Greg, and we did mention Barbara Ullman when you were stepping out. You're welcome. Okay, great. And I'm going to add a few. Rachel Sora bat Leah, and then Dvorah Sarah bat Yosefina, and Yehuda Tzvi ben Zion. Any others to add? I think we covered a lot of them. Good. Second stanza then. Misha beirach imotenu, mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with the refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. So this time we're going to continue with the Musaf Amidah. Now I'm just sort of doing a little calculation here. The question is, we did not publicize that our service would be live streamed. So I believe there's one person who I know is probably watching, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think Deborah from Clearwater is watching at this time. So, Jeff, do you know if anyone at your household is watching? See me? Or not sure. Okay, so we're gonna do, I think, what we will be safe rather than sorry here in terms of making a halachic error. So let's turn and we'll just daven Musaf individually. And that would be on page 156b. And the Musaf Amidah, tomorrow we'll be doing the festival one. But today it's still the regular Shabbat Amidah, found between pages 156b and 161. So we'll still invite you to rise and face our eastern wall here. Page 156b is in Benny, or Binyamin, or Beryl. So I will, I'll address that. Yes. So I was just asked a question. It's a very good question. I just wanted to be able to see if we could address it. Mark raised the question. He noticed that we have the phrase here in the Avot Ufoked Sarah, that God basically visited Sarah. And then in other Sidurs and other prayer books, we have the phrase Ve'ezrat Sarah, God was a help to Sarah. So in essence, it's just different formulations of the prayer. By visiting Sarah and helping her become pregnant, God helped her. So you can look at it as either meaning there. Toby, you look like you had something to add. Oh, okay, good. So we had to conclude the Amidah last for Shachrit. We had Greg chant Oseh Shalom, so that we don't become boring and do the same thing over and over. I'd like to invite you to turn to page 329, and we will do a song that we have not done here very much. I think I maybe done it once or twice, but it's very nice. And inasmuch as the end of the Amidah is really a silent prayer, so too this line talks about that. We are on page 329, to the second song down, Ele Hamda Libi. So these are the desires of my heart. Husana, have mercy. Va'ana titalem, and do not turn away from us. Don't ignore us. So please join in with me in the singing of this. It's a nice melody. Ele Hamda Libi. Husana ve'ana titalem. Ele Hamda Libi. Husana ve'ana titalem. Ele Hamda Libi, 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 Husana ve'ana titalem. And now I would like to invite you to turn to page 182, where sometimes, admittedly, I've cut Ein Kelohenu a little on the short side. Today, let's do the entire Ein Kelohenu, in as much as we have a nice spirit for doing that. Page 182, Ein Kelohenu. And I'm going to do this to a different melody. I need to clear my throat first. Excuse me there. So, En Kelohenu, En Kadonenu, En Kemalkeinu, En Kemoshienu, Mi Kelohenu, Mi Kadonenu, Mi Kemalkeinu, Mi Moshienu, no del Eloheinu, no del Adonenu, no del Malkeinu, no del Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Sheiktiru, Avotenu lefanecha et ketoret hasamim. And we did the whole thing. Let's continue on page 183 then, as we invite you to rise and face our eastern wall for the chanting of Aleinu. Aleinu l'shaveach ladon hakol, latet gedula leotze breshit, shelo asanu kogoyei ha'aratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינת זו בגבי מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו וסולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, ודעת היום וישבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת, אין עוד, על כן נתקל עולם אחד שדי וחרבנו ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. And please be seated. I would like to mention those whose Yortzeiten are observed on this Shabbat, for this week. Margaret Laboda, the mother of Barry Laboda. Matilda Levin, mother of Norman Levin. And Sadie Davids, grandmother of Mark Davids. And do we have any other Yortzeiten that are commemorated for this week? So here, I face a bit of a rabbinic quandary, but I am going to affirm, I know that there are some online, and maybe more have come online towards the end of the service, and I'm just going to take the responsibility on myself to make an exception here, perhaps a possible exception, since I think it's very important. I know that there is no one else in the Davids family to say Kaddish for Sadie, and Mark wanted to be here today and was not able to. So I am just going to take rabbinic liberty and take any responsibility for doing thereof on my own head for doing so, lest it be an error. But I think the recitation of Kaddish really is so important that in light of the doubt that we're not really able to ascertain how many are online, but we know there are some, and there's certainly other Jews in the city. We can, that I'm going to go ahead and recite Kaddish here. Page 184. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'vyomechon u'b'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'yimru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'lemei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpo'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמדקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. May God grant comfort to all of us who mourn. May the memory of those for whom we mourn remain among us as a loving, living, and inspiring benediction. And we can say, Amen. And at this time, I'd like to call upon Tom Mayer, our congregation president, to share some announcements with us for this Shabbat.
Just a couple of things. Rabbi Barnett, thank you so much for leading us in services and your Devar Torah. We appreciate it. Make sure with the weather you have a safe trip home tomorrow, or today, later today. Please join us tomorrow morning. We will be having a Shavuot service starting at 9:30. It will be on Zoom only. We'd like to have the Yizkor service with it, so please, if you can, please plan to attend that. That's all I have. Shabbat Shalom.
Tom, concerning the Yizkor service, some people may have the booklets at home. Do you happen to have any extra left here at the moment? Okay, so I think I have one at home, but if I can't find it, okay, and if I can't find it, then I'll ask someone, we'll have someone in the minyan there to lead some sections from that, because I know that was one that was printed specially for Congregation Beth Am. I'll have access, of course, to the prayers. Okay. And at this time, I'd like to invite everyone to turn to page 187 to conclude our services with the chanting of Adon Olam. And we'll do the entire hymn at this time, page 187. I'm trying to think of what melody. We'll do this one. Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yitzir nivra להתנסם וחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא אדון עולם ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא אדון עולם והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם והוא אחד ואין שני להמשילו להכבירה אדון עולם בלי ראשית בלי תכלית ולא העוז והמשרה אדון עולם והוא אלי וחי גואלי בצור חבלי בעת צרה אדון עולם והוא ניסי ומנוס לי מנת כוסי ביום אקרא אדון עולם בידו אבקית רוחי והייתי שם בעירה אדון עולם ועם רוחי גביעתי אדוני לי ולא אירא אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא להתנסה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא אדון עולם. And I want to thank Tamara. I think I saw the top of her head back there a moment ago. We want to thank Tamara from the Life Point Church here for assisting in so many aspects of the technical recording of this and making it possible for this to be definitely on YouTube today. Thank you so much. Again, I'm Rabbi David Barnett, and we'll see you, God willing, tomorrow on Zoom for Shavuot, and then next week, which would be June 10th and 11th. Yes, that would be June 10th and 11th. We will be back here in person for services. Shabbat Shalom, and thank you.